Let's get more on what we can expect from the local market today. Evan Lucas is standing by for us at IG in Melbourne. Evan, good morning to you. Let's start with the oil price. Another mover overnight. We continue to see it ramp up. But what about these calls for one soft gen? Do you think that's overstated? In fact, we see the price hit that during this.
Look, I think with regards to the SocGen call, I have read that article, and the way they're talking about it is that it is almost like the scorched earth idea. The reason for it is that if Syria was unfortunately hit, and if the allies do actually go ahead, there is the tension that comes with that, and whether or not it actually brings in other players in the region, and that includes Iran, it also includes Iraq. And the reason I look at Iraq is that currently Iraq is at a 5-year high in terms of probably internal political crisis fighting it, and there is a fear there that they may even go to civil war themselves. And Iraq is the second largest producer of oil in the OPEC nations, and that's where all this sort of idea of 150 US a barrel could come about, is if the Syrian tensions then spread through the rest of the region and does really affect that sort of that oil pipelines that we have coming out of the Middle East. So that's where that whole idea gets to. I don't think it's going to get to that kind of point. It certainly sounds like the diplomats have probably stepped in last night. We did see the UK and France supporting the US call for that there is definitely been a chemical attack happening in Syria, but they are trying to moderate the whole idea of maybe having a punitive attack. So that will probably reduce it. It's why also in the last half of the session over in New York, when the crude oil inventory number was released, it also took a bit of heat out of the oil price surge that we saw during Asian trade yesterday. The oil inventory in the US actually jumped up quite strongly to around about 3 million barrels after contracting by about 1.4 million barrels the month before. So that took a bit of heat out of the price and the tension that we've seen coming out of the oil price. But in terms of 150 a barrel, it would be the worst scenario, scorched earth idea, that the tensions in the Middle East spreads to Iran and also to Iraq.
Got to ask you, there's a lot of talk about the impact of a high oil price on the United States and what that's going to do for the growth story over there. But what about the emerging markets like India and Indonesia, where we've already seen capital flowing out of there because of tapering concerns over in the United States? What impact will a high oil price have on these guys?
Yeah, and I think you've really got to concentrate particularly on India from an Australian-centric point of view. India is our 4th largest export nation, and we also use them as our 9th biggest import nation. So it is a real key to how Australia works and where we send most of our material. And last night we saw the Indian rupee plummeting to its all-time low of 68.45 rupee to the US dollar. Not only that, it's now crashed something along the lines of around about 13.5% in the last quarter and 20% in the last year. And that all sort of culminates into 3 things. They now have the largest current account deficit they've had in their record. They get 80% of their oil imports coming into the country. Now, considering how cheap now the rupee is, it is making it very expensive for the Indians to do the kind of businesses that they do. If they are going to start bringing that back into equating it back to an Australian-centric idea, if they start having to pay that amount of money for the current oil inventory that they have, they're going to have to wind back down on other areas. And if their exports drop off as well, they may end up having to have a look at what happened back in 1991 when they had an absolute crisis where they had to actually bail themselves out with gold rather than actually to pay for imports, rather than actually the currency itself. And that would be an absolute disaster to have a country the size of India with the population it has doing that kind of thing. And that's feeding through into other emerging markets, like you just said, in Indonesia. Indonesia's in the same boat. Their current account deficit was the widest it's ever been in their history, and they also get 85% of their oil imports coming into the country. So it's a real problem for the region as a whole. If emerging markets do start to crash and we do see the Fed withdrawing money, we do know that we've actually seen roughly around about $8.7 billion in local debt in India and also in Indonesia being withdrawn since the end of May, as people bet the Fed is going to taper, and that will mean that it will probably ramp up. And less money in these countries means less imports coming in and less exports going out from them, and that's also another bad thing for the Australian economy as well.
Okay. Earnings season, that's what we're watching today in Australia. Most of the big names are out of the way now, although we do have a couple of ones today, Westfield and Qantas among them, I think. What are you expecting from these players?
Yeah, look, I think at the moment, with regards to probably concentrating on Qantas, Qantas has had a very, very interesting year. We know where it's come with the Emirates deal. That's been very, very good for where they've currently sat. It's probably going to see their international arm, which is where most people will concentrate today. Maybe it'll probably make a slight loss, but they are the expectations are for it to come right back in from that $266 million loss they made last year as they diversify that portfolio and really sort of wring out all the issues they've had with that. Also, over the year, petroleum prices and jet fuel prices particularly have been a lot cheaper than they probably have over the years before. So they will probably have some good little tailwinds coming from that part of the division. We also know that the Aussie dollar has been quite strong and it has driven sort of Australian-centric transport as well. So it does have some fairly reasonable tailwinds. In saying that, it is still a fairly rough and ready area of the entire market. Transport, we know how Virgin's been tracking. We've seen Air New Zealand do quite well. But also, if you look regionally, like Cathay Pacific and also having a look at Singapore Airlines, they're all under the same sort of constraint pressures. We know that they do have higher prices. The competition is ramping up by lower budget airlines. So watch also what happens with Jetstar. Jetstar is a brand they are very much concentrating on, and I think it'll probably be the most interesting result coming out of today. Would expect a slight pop if they do manage to get in line or slightly ahead of expectations, Kate.
Why the most interesting result today, Jetstar?
Look, with regards to Jetstar, Jetstar is a brand that most people see Qantas heading towards, and there is a talk that the Qantas will be the Qantas Group, with Jetstar as probably its leading sort of profile figure, with Qantas as its premium brand underneath that idea, and then its international arm. And the more and more we see Jetstar sort of ramping up its take, particularly here in the domestic market, the Melbourne to Sydney line is really, really getting quite crowded. So they have started gearing it themselves towards other areas of the market, so particularly Sydney to Brisbane. They're also looking at Sydney to Adelaide and Sydney over to Perth. And then you've got the Asian part of the business as well, and that low budget airline in Asia is really, really taking off. Japan's done quite well. Also, the Vietnam hub has also been quite a good place for Jetstar. So it does look like over the next 4 or 5 years that Jetstar could become the #1 brand with a premium brand in Qantas and then its international arm under the whole sort of Qantas Group brand. So that's what we were looking at, and if that story continues to ramp up that way.
Okay, Evan Lucas, thanks so much. Appreciate that preview.
Thanks, Kate.